The Apostle Paul is one of those guys who just couldn't stay out of a fight. The first thing we know about him is that he was zealously persecuting Christians, and even when he became a Christian himself, he spent his entire ministry career attending to controversies in the various communities he served. When Paul was basically an intern at Antioch, they started allowing Jews and Gentiles to eat together, which really upset the leadership in Jerusalem. So they started meddling, and when things got too hot, they called everyone together for a little chit-chat. This gathering was recorded in the 15th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles and is regarded by most as the first council of the church, the Council of Jerusalem. The main subject was whether Gentiles had to follow all the laws of the Torah in order to be admitted into the Christian community, which at that point was still predominantly Jewish. The decision of the leaders was no. Gentiles had only to refrain from eating meat sacrificed to idols and fornicating. Everything else, including circumcision, would be optional. Paul was happy with this decision, which he viewed as a compromise, but as more and more Gentiles began joining the Christian movement, the controversy kept flaring back up. Paul's entire ministry was haunted by this fight, and as such, we have this argument to thank for the existence of about half of the New Testament. Almost everything that's in the Bible was composed because of an ongoing argument. If it weren't for controversy, we might have about a 10-page Bible. So it's appropriate that when texts were picked to be in the biblical canon, they were picked by arguing about it. In the years since Christianity first began to spread, there was no such thing as an authoritative list of texts which belonged in the Bible. When the congregations were reading their letters from Paul in Rome and Corinth and Galatia, most of the New Testament hadn't even been written yet. Even after those letters had been circulating for decades, there was still nothing called a Bible in most churches. And when the New Testament refers to the Scriptures, they're almost exclusively referring to the Hebrew Bible, which itself was not a finalized collection. Slowly, as Christians shared what texts they were using for worship and study, a consensus grew about many of them. Others were still very controversial, though. The Torah is obvious, but what about Ecclesiastes, or Esther, or the Maccabees? The same was true in the New Testament. Matthew was popular, but Hebrews, Revelation, 2 Peter, they were getting an awful lot of side-eye. There were, of course, attempts to impose order on this chaos and get Christians to embrace a certain list, a set of the same holy texts. The Synod of Hippo in 393, for example, endorsed a canon which is the same as the present-day Roman Catholic canon. Much later, though, the Protestants decided to base their Old Testament on the Jewish Tanakh. None of these pronouncements ended the argument once and for all. Some Christians like to claim that the canon is closed, but there are multiple competing canons right now. There always have been, and there probably always will be. The fact that Christians can't agree on a single list of books to be in their canon is actually a perfect metaphor for this strange book of books, which by and large doesn't resolve arguments, it preserves them. For example, in Romans 3, Paul articulates what many Protestants take to be a principal article of their belief, that we are saved by grace through faith, apart from works. Compare that with what James said. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but do not have any works? Can faith save you? Faith by itself, if it doesn't have any works, is dead. These two positions stand in definite contrast to each other in the text, and Christians have a long history of interpreting and arguing over them to try to bring them into harmony or else to decide between them which is preferable. Appeals to Scripture alone won't resolve it because the Bible preserves both sides, and this tendency of the Bible to preserve an argument unsettled rather than to resolve it isn't a bug, it's a feature, because it forces us to engage with that tension in the text, to decide how we're going to apply it, instead of engaging in mindless compliance. The reformer Martin Luther famously called the book of James an epistle of straw, by which he meant that it was of much lower value, in his opinion, than other parts of the Bible, for example, Romans. In fact, Luther suggested that we should take out Hebrews, Jude, Revelation, and James from the canon. For centuries, German-language Bibles were printed without those books in them. And though they've generally been reintroduced today, they're often put at the end of the New Testament, out of traditional order. Luther changed the canon. The canon is intensely contested because it's a source of authority. It's a tool used for shaping lives individually and collectively. The word canon literally means rule. The one who makes the rules has the power. By challenging the canon, Luther was challenging the church's authority to set the rules. And he wasn't alone in wanting to cut stuff out of his Bible. Thomas Jefferson took an actual razor to his Bible. Cutting and pasting from the four Gospels, Thomas Jefferson assembled a new document he called the Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Noticeably absent from this document are any references to the supernatural. Gone are the healing miracles, the resurrection accounts, and any reference to Jesus as divine. Thomas Jefferson wanted to get to a hypothetical, pure philosophy of Jesus behind the religious trappings which he viewed as harmful superstition. Jefferson started his scrapbooking project because he believed clergy used religion as, quote, a mere contrivance to filch wealth and power for themselves. He believed that by changing the canon, he could take power away from the people who had formed it. Authority is something we confer on the text by listening to it. There are parts of Scripture which are rarely read or used in churches. Most preachers don't base their sermons on Obadiah, Yebuz, Nahum, or Lamessa. Canon or not, how much authority does it really have if you're never listening to it? And I know you're not listening to some of these texts because I made 2 of those names up and you didn't even notice. Most of us have influences in our lives that have more authority over us than Scripture. Norms of our family life, culture, economy, and jobs which dictate our behaviors, large and small, far more than the oracles of the minor prophets. At the end of the day, questions about canonicity are all about authority. And since authority comes from people choosing who or what to be obedient to, questions about what belongs in this strange book of books, how we should interpret the Bible, and how we should apply it to our lives are also about you. They're about who you will give authority to in your life.